I've been doing ethics research most of my career, and mainly what is called applied ethics, and then ethics in the fields of medicine and biotechnology, some project connected to nanotechnology, and I've been involved in the patent, discussing the patent issue in teaching and supervising students, but I haven't been writing very much on it. I have one article this year that was on aspects of the patent system. So what I'm going to do is saying something very general here, and I don't know very much about the antibiotics field. So this is kind of combining different information and seeing the whole issue that you are discussing from the societal aspect. So, of course, and this in New York Times last year is, of course, what we're talking about. What happens if we get the situation, the worst situation, namely that antibiotics stop being effective due to resistance in bacteria? And that is, as these authors in the New York Times opinion says, we will miss it. And that is obvious. Their case is this one woman who was who died due to an infection because she didn't respond to any antibiotics. And of course, now there is a war here. All the articles I read that is in this general field says that there is a war going on against the bacteria. And we are losing that war, is what they're saying. And that is because antimicrobial microbial resistance infections take now 700,000 lives globally each year. That's quite a lot. And even in the affluent countries, in the well structured with good health services, there are, like in Europe, tens of thousands dying. So even though a lot of these people are in poorer countries which don't have the same kind of specter of antibiotics, it's still a big problem even in our part of the world. And the numbers will rise, they say. And if we lose this war, and some say when we lose this war, I guess people here are doing something to win this war. So I shouldn't say that when we lose this war, but if we lose it, it's obviously like minor infections and like gonorrhea and other sexually transmitted infection, as well as diseases that we take to be eradicated today, will start taking lives on a scale that we can't imagine, really. We'll turn to the kind of situation of the Spanish flu and that kind of disease problematic. Of course, normal medical procedures will be life-threatening. It will become high-risk operations. Just having a minor surgery might be really life-threatening. And of course, the economic costs will be counted in trillions of dollars, they say. So we could say that this is the situation. And then, of course, the problem is because we're using too much antibiotics. And you could say, well, it's just reducing that. But that's not a situation that we can kind of even create, because demand for antibiotics worldwide is rising, and it is rising due to rising income in large parts of the developing world, especially some countries. So they are starting to use the kind of tools that we have been used for a long time. Of course, it's not just in treatment of human diseases, but it is widespread use in farming. And it's used for speeding growth and for preventing diseases, not only treating diseases. So the farm problematic is huge. And of course, we don't do that, for example, in Norway, and it's phased out in Europe. But large parts of the world elsewhere is using it both for growth enhancement and for this especially preventative, prophylactic use of antibiotics in farming. And this problem, these are not biological or technical problems, they are social problems that is creating this situation. So the obvious remedy is reducing the use. But that's not an easy solution, they say, because antibiotic resistance persists long after relevant antibiotics are removed from the environment. I mean, these bacteria that has developed resistance, they retain that, even if it's not stimulated by being exposed to the antibiotics. So in that sense, it's not like ordinary pollution, where you can remove the pollutant and then the problem is solved. It is much more like global warming. So even if we start using CO2 emissions now, the problem will persist for a long time because there are these reinforcement cycles. And the same is the case here. Of course, reduced use is important in slowing down resistance spread, but still it's not sufficient. And of course, the effect of antibiotic use is primarily local. But the global situation we are in is making the spread of these resistance bacteria much more effective. So it's making it a global problem. Although the effect is local, the problem becomes global, just like the climate problem. So even if Norway develops the ideal policy and use on antibiotics, the problem isn't solved. Even if Europe does it, the problem isn't solved because we're part of a global system. So this is a global problem and it must be solved globally. So an international agreement on the reduced use is important for everybody, but it is not sufficient for the reasons I already stated. And also for something, and now we're turning to philosophy, my field, that is, in the environmental discussion, there is a concept called the tragedy of the commons. It's a very simple principle. If you have a limited resource, where too many people have access to that resource, and none has a right to exclude others from that resource, well, then it will be overused, because nobody has the responsibility for a balanced use of the resource. So that is something, the typical example is common land grazing. If you have a farmer community and you have some private land and you have some common land, then everybody has a private interest in keeping the cattle on the common land as long as there is any grass left. So nobody has any interest in preserving that common ground, because if you kind of keep your cattle off, well, then others will overuse that and use your private resource, and then you're the kind of loser in the system. So, and this is of course the same with with antibiotics. It's a collective action problem. My use has trivial impact on me. I mean, it is just a matter of treatment. So if I have a disease, I don't know if it's bacterial or not. Well, and I have access to antibiotics, I use it just in case. It doesn't harm me significantly or anything like that. And it has a trivial impact on the environment, because what is the effect of me using some antibiotics for a limited period of time? It doesn't have any impact. But when everybody does that, of course it has a devastating impact now and for future generations. So there seems to be some kind of noise there, is it?
It's very close.
So I should do like this?
Yeah, I think I'm just
That's,
a little bit away.
you can hear me there?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah? Oh.
Maybe it's better.
It's better, yeah, much easier for me. So, what we could say that the costs are invisible and they are statistical here, but the result is ignorance in a sense, because we don't know the costs of our use, but we know it now, we've heard it, but then we kind of choose to stay in the ignorant state because we have something to benefit from using this common resource for our own sake, because the costs are placed somewhere else that is not affecting us. So that has devastating impact, especially for future generations. So that was the one possible remedy, that was reduced use. It's difficult because due to this tragedy of the commons logic. The other remedy is what you are discussing here. That's new antibiotics. And that is, of course, if the reduced use cannot solve the problem, well, then new antibiotics is necessary to solve it. Not necessarily new, perhaps, but finding new ways of reusing old could be a solution too. I think someone has talked about this today, but in essence, it must be some kind of new. But the numbers of new antibiotics reaching the market is, of course, decreasing rapidly, as people have said. And the reason for this seems to be obvious. There are not sufficient research incentives. Of course, the problem might be different too. It's difficult. There is not a kind of basic material available, but that adds up still to not sufficient research incentives. Because if it's difficult, well, then we need more stronger incentives in order to make a greater effort. And then someone says that this is due to the patent system. The patent system is working well in many areas, but it is failing in this area here. Now, the critique of the patent system is so that it will say it's failing in a lot of areas, and I will touch upon that because it's related to the alleged failure here. So, what is patent in this context? Well, patent is a system for protection of intellectual property rights to an invention. Why do we have patents? Well, that is basically to stimulate innovation. And how do we stimulate innovation? Well, we say that if you make some product, then you have a right to prevent others from using that product. It is not a right to use it, it's a right to prevent others from using it. And that's part of the logic here that's problematic. So it's the exclusive right to exploit the product or not exploit it for a limited period of time. Usually it says 20 years, but it's always, in a lot of cases, it's given extensions and all that. But still it is fairly short time if one thinks so, especially in the pharma sector where developing medication is so time consuming and resource consuming. But in most areas of medicine, it's quite effective. It's working. A lot of these pharma companies are having a high surplus. They're earning money to a large extent. So some say the problem is that they're earning too much. It's too good protection. But it's not working in all areas. So, as I said, others are prevented from exploiting the invention without a license from the patent holder. And that makes a monopoly, and a monopoly is, of course, the way where you can put the price that you want. This seems to be a kind of way to make money and stimulate in an area where we lack something like antibiotics. It should be working as good as in any other area. But that is not how it works. And of course, if the general intention is to stimulate innovation and industrial development, and we don't get innovation and industrial development, well, then there's something that is failing in the system. And then we have to rethink the system. And to look at how the system works or doesn't work, we have to look at some other critiques of the patent system, not merely in this context here, in this area, because all the critiques of the patent system are related to each other in some way or another. So, classical critiques of the patent system, or it's not critiques really, it's pointing out some system problem of the patent system. The first one, or the last one rather, it's the later one in time, that is what we call a patent thicket. And that is Carl Shapiro who pointed out that in today's patent system, it's fairly easy to patent something, even if you don't use it. So a lot of people make patents, and then they are effectively kind of have the possibility of using this innovation. And a patent ticket is a situation where we get an overlapping set of patent rights that those seeking to commercialize new technology, where they do obtain licenses from multiple patentees. And in this way, the different patents that are overlapping into the same area may block each other. So it's difficult to say who actually has the right here because they are overlapping. And it is also the case that it may restrict access to technology necessary for inventions. Not on purpose, but just because people don't know actually who has the right. So it may lead to a hold-up due to unclarity or risk of infringing ownership. So a patent ticket is one problem that may arise in the patent system. Even though it's meant for innovation, it's blocking innovation because it's difficult to navigate the whole system. And the other, I talked about the tragedy of the commons, where there is a common resource and no one can block others from using it, and then it will be overused. And then Heller and Eisenberg in 1998 pointed out that the patent system in some cases might lead to the exactly opposite kind of tragedy. That is the tragedy of the anti-commons. And that is a resource, here is an innovation for example, is underused when multiple owners have a right to exclude others from a limited resource and none has effective privilege to use. So these two critiques are kind of similar, but here you can say that someone is actively blocking others, preventing others from using a resource because they want to keep this space for moving themselves. So they don't want to give others the opportunity. So because they have a right, they just keep it and it's not developed. But this other case is more a matter of people being uncertain whether they can actually go into this field because it's too difficult to understand the pattern of patents. Both these critiques lead to the kind of conclusion that it is too easy to gain a patent because it is, in the situation we have today, less risk shared and inventions are not utilized. So there is a stimulus here for kind of not for just getting a right and not using it and not giving it out to others. Of course, this can be discussed, and Heller and Eisenberg have later said that, well, their critique seems to, when they explore it empirical, the problem isn't as great as they say, but still the principle is a problem, and that is something that affects this area that we are talking to. How about antibiotics patents? Why are they not profitable? According to the literature that I have read, one of the problems is simply that new antibiotics patents cannot compete. You cannot gain sufficient market because there is a competition here with already existing products, existing antibiotics that has run out of the protection period, so there is produced generic varieties, and these say now, if you have a disease or you have some animal that has a bacterial disease, and you say, should I use a very expensive antibiotic or should I use a cheap generic one that I know there is some resistance to? Of course, I use the cheap one first and see whether it works. And if it works well, then I don't need the expensive one. So there is a kind of drive here towards using these cheaper products. And that is kind of different from in some other areas of pharmacy, it seems to be. That is one reason why people don't use it. And of course, another reason why it's not profitable is there is a lot of basic research necessary to reach a potential product. And of course, if you're discussing whether you should go into research of this kind, or development rather, commercial development of this kind, if you have delayed and uncertain profits in an area, well, then you don't go for that. Then you find some other field that is more promising. So it seems to be something in the antibiotics field that is not as stimulating as in other areas of pharma. But that is the same situation that we have a lot of diseases in the world in general. I mean, a lot of the typical diseases that are taking the lives or making people sick all over the world do not have any efficient medication, just because there is not sufficient market there. So, for example, the diseases that commonly affect people in the developing world, a lot of these do not have proper treatment, although that would be fairly easy to get, because there is not sufficient incentive, because there is not a strong enough market. So you cannot get prices sufficient to regain. So it's better finding something new, some new treatment of a common disease in the affluent world. That is part of the logic of the patent system, and I'll return to that. So in this situation where you can say the patent system doesn't give sufficient stimulus for the private companies, then of course the solution must be public research money. I mean, we should carry out the basic research leading to innovation in the public sector. And of course that is done. I mean, a lot of people here are into that kind of research, I suppose. And of course that is part of what we call the university's third mission. That is, the universities have a task of targeted use and transfer of academic knowledge to help resolve diverse societal challenges. And if there are any societal challenges that academic knowledge should be helped to resolve, then this is certainly one of them. And the other part of the third mission is transfer of technologies and innovations in the form of cooperation with public and private enterprises. So of course, this is not only something that is part of the incentive structure, so someone go into that if there is money and leave out if it's not. For us at universities, this is certainly part of our mission. That is part of what we're supposed to do. So this is kind of moral demand on us. That is what society expects of us. So then the obvious solution is we say we go full scale into this research here. We use a lot more money on this field than others. But then we get the problem, well, research should be free too, so the researchers themselves should decide what they should go for. So of course we cannot really get a kind of a state-driven research initiative in this direction without it being kind of anti-liberal. If you're going to prioritize this in a sufficient degree, well, then you need to use a lot of force, and that is not good for research. So there is something problems here. We have a kind of solution here using this third mission, and then get the products out, and then cooperate with private business, and then get it out to the market, but it doesn't seem to work fully. Is this kind of hitting the situation? Do you recognize it like this? And someone could say that, well, now we're facing our own medicine. Because this situation that we have in antibiotics is the same that poor people have, people living in the developing world. Because patents stimulate development of treatments for affluent societies due to this profit structure, the poor suffer diseases where treatments are not developed, or diseases where they cannot afford the available treatment. That is the situation today in the world. And of course now we have feeling the same kind of pressure, because we have an area where we need treatment and perhaps we cannot get it. Because the same reward structure that is kind of not stimulating necessary treatments for diseases in the third world, is the same structure that is creating this antibiotics shortage problem, namely the reward structure in the patent system. And of course, as usual, the poorest will probably bear the highest cost also here if we get into that situation where the amount of actual functionable antibiotics has disappeared. So, how do we do then? There are different ways of going here. Of course, we have a moral duty to do something about this and a political duty to do something about this. And the easy solution that has been proposed and tried is just giving patent extensions. Saying, well, okay, if you get a new workable antibiotics into the market, you don't just get the normal patent period or the normal extension that you usually get if you apply for it and can justify it. You get an extra patent extension. So we kind of give more, even more and stronger incentives. But that seems to be too easy. It's the easy solution, and the problem is it doesn't seem to work. It will bring existing products out. I mean, because there are a few products that are shelved, that are patented and possible to use, but it's not used now because it's not profitable enough. But of course, with a patent extension, it may turn into be sufficiently profitable, so that will come out. But it is probably not sufficient for innovation, because if you think about the innovation, if you're going to plan for what kind of field you're going to do this kind of innovative research in, then this kind of way down the pipeline reward is probably not sufficient. Of course, politicians are changing their policies all the time, and if you start a development project and you're expecting some kind of extended reward in the long run, well, that policy may have disappeared by the time you get a product onto the market. So it's probably not working, that kind of patent extension. It's working for already existing products that are not on the market, but it's not working for the intention of going into more intensive research and development. So, if we say that this description of the patent situation is correct, then we could go for a different reform. We could reform the entire patent system. And that has been proposed in the situation of the poor countries, as I said. There's a philosopher, or ethicist, I should say, Thomas Pogge, who has proposed, there are many patent reform proposals, but this is one of them that is collecting a kind of group of proposals and building a structure that it is plausible. And he says that we need two kinds of patent systems. One that is the regular one, that is directed at commercially viable research, and then we need a public goods patent system that is rewarding inventions that are on essential products and that are of common significance, that are of great public significance. Of course, essential medicines are of that kind. So he suggests that if someone successfully develops new medicines, the results of this development should be provided free of charge to anybody producing pharmaceuticals of any kind, for example antibiotics, and it should be provided free of charge globally. So if you have an invention, it should be something that could be put into production without people having to pay a high license fee. Because then you get the product onto the market and you get it onto a real market, namely a competitive market. And then nobody can really put the price very high because there is always someone who is willing to give a lower price within a reasonable profit margin. So if everybody could get access to these new products immediately, well, then it would become products that became available for everybody. But of course, why should anybody do that? I mean, make a product and then make it available free. Well, that is if they get a reward. And that reward should be a reward in proportion to the health impact of the product, Pogge says. So we should build up a public fund, and that fund should pay out profits, not on the basis on the market, what the market is paying, but rather on an assessment of the health impact of the product. If we have a product that has significant health impact, that is saving life, that is doing something good, that is solving a problem, well, then they should have a higher profits than if it is a product that has marginal impact. For example, another medication for regulating blood pressure or something like that, which is important in itself, but doesn't make a big difference. This would give incentives to assure that everybody. So this would give incentives to the producers to ensure that everybody gets access to the medicine, because that is a way to get greater health impact, and it would also ensure that people are instructed in proper use. And of course, one of the problems of the antibiotics situation we are in is that people are not actually using antibiotics in the proper way. And of course, that is lowering the health impact. So you should have some reward structure that is rewarding actually a medication that is used in the right way. So we could say that overuse of antibiotics would reduce the positive health impact and reduce the profits accordingly. So therefore, if we could have that kind of structure, then it would be workable. So, and the last point in this proposal is that these incentives, the money that is going out to these who have developed these new medications, it is covered by a global health fund. And the developed countries, the rich countries, Norway, the US, Germany, and so forth, should be the main, everybody should pay in, but the main cost should come from the rich countries. And he has argued why we should be interested in doing that. I cannot go into that argument because I guess I have about the time left that I should have. This proposal, as I said, should only include essential medicines, for example, antibiotics. The rest should be covered by the existing patent system because that is workable in the market. So that is a way. This is just one proposal. Other proposals may be possible, but I think every workable proposal would in some way have to go in and adjust the market effect, because that is the problem with the patent system in these areas. The market effect is producing the wrong kind of incentive, and then we need public interest to guide the profit structure in some way. Okay, that is one suggestion. There are others possible. Anyway, if you look at the whole area, if we are going to avoid a post-antibiotic era, it requires a common effort, just like the climate problem. And that is because when the incentive structure is not functioning, a reform is required, and that must be global. It should be a general patent reform, not merely directed at antibiotics, because antibiotics is just one special case of a common problem of the patent system. And it must be combined with globally binding strategies for reduction in use. And these are, for example, nowadays, I don't know what the prescription situation is in other countries, but in a lot of countries, you can get antibiotics fairly easy. It should be prescription for medical use worldwide. There should be an agreement on taxation on use in agri and aquaculture, so making it more difficult to use it, more costly to use it, so you don't get all this unnecessary use for growth promotion and for prophylactic use. And we should fund more information on the harms of overuse. But as I said, these are not, reduction is not sufficient. We also need something to make more products. And of course, we could develop vaccines and other alternatives to antibiotics.